Well, a good reminder here, daylight saving time ends this Sunday, which means setting our clocks back an hour. Here with some tips tackling this big change in our sleep schedule is social worker and psychotherapist Chioma Efejedia. Chioma, thank you for taking the time to speak with us this morning about this, because we need to remember to set our clocks back, but it can have a huge impact on our health, on our mental health. What do you see when it comes to this change and how people struggle with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Courtney, for having me here. One of the things that I see a lot of, especially with a lot of the clients that I work with, is because they feel like, okay, we're going to get an extra hour, they don't actually regulate their schedule, and they take advantage of the fact that, hey, this is going to be something great, but really we really want to do small increments of adjusting our time, really to make sure that we are managing our mental health and the mood shifts that happen, especially when we have kids.
Especially when we have kids. And I know it can be really difficult for little ones who have a pretty set schedule. Do you think it's one of those things, though, that people maybe think, oh, we fall back an hour, I get an extra hour of sleep, and maybe don't realize the impact of it?
Absolutely. That's such a huge thing when people don't actually realize the impact. It's more of that gradual, again, we want to take that time, that slow steps to making sure that we are recognizing that this impacts our sleep cycles. And oftentimes what we find is because we're getting this extra hour, people are like, okay, I have this extra time, and they're not taking care of that time to actually get that rest or catch up on that rest. So they're making themselves a little bit busy. When you have kids, you want to make sure that, you know, you're, again, slowing that down so that way they're not being dysregulated and it's not throwing us off as parents. So, you know, adjusting those bedtime routines by like 10 minutes versus like the complete hour could be something that's really helpful.
And I was even just thinking the sleep deprivation, I mean, especially when kids are little and maybe you aren't on the best sleep schedule to begin with, it can really have a significant impact on the way you process things, deal with emotions. Is this something that over time can really affect somebody, just being so tired?
Absolutely. And, you know, I think one of the biggest things to consider is it takes about a week for our bodies to fully adjust anyways. And one thing that I constantly find or hear my clients talk about is the fact that they notice that they're drained throughout the day. Because one of the things that also happens is we lose an hour of daylight, and that also impacts, you know, the amount of sun we're getting, which impacts our moods, which impacts, you know, whether somebody feels overwhelmed and anxiety. So being able to even just have like transition breaks throughout tasks, just to again slow that down and making sure that we are monitoring our mood and the fluctuation of how that changes.
I feel like even the awareness of it too, right? Just, hey, take it easy going into this weekend. So your tip, one of your biggest tips is getting kind of a little bit ahead of this, right? So what would your recommendation be, say even for today, going into this weekend?
So one of the recommendations that I would be is plan your schedule lightly. Just make small changes. So you want to do like 10 to 15 minute changes. You don't want to do something like drastic in terms of like taking a whole hour. That's going to be something that's really important, especially for working parents, for the kids to get into that cycle. And during that time, you know, build in rest practices, build in things that, you know, whether that's like doing deep breathing exercises or making sure that you have like a bedtime routine for the kids that incorporates some of those changes. Those are going to be things that are going to be really important.
And Chioma, as we get into like the darker months, I find, you know, we're not going to get as much sunlight. It's going to get a little bit colder. I know seasonal depression can be a bit of an issue for a lot of our viewers. What advice do you have on that? Something that someone might be able to start doing today to make themselves feel a bit better?
That's a great question. One of the things is we really want to be gentle and be kind to ourselves, right? Leaning into some of that self-care practice from the onset. As we do know, like it is going to get darker. So being able to say, okay, we're building in self-care practices, whether that is, again, doing mindfulness, grounding exercises throughout the day, just to kind of support our mental health and well-being, noticing when we are having mood shifts and changes, and saying, okay, if this feels like a lot, maybe you want to get an expert support through talking to a therapist. And
my last question into that, it's so important that people know that help is available. I mean, we're into November now. We were talking about Movember and how there's a lot of awareness for men's mental health, and just this time of year can be difficult, I think, for a lot of people. And with your practice, you know, the message is that support is there if someone needs to talk to someone.
Absolutely. That support is always there. And usually it's just knowing like who's that right fit or who to connect to. And one of the things that, you know, when we are struggling, knowing that we don't have to do that on our own, and we can really find somebody to talk to, and that can support some of these transitions that we're going through.
Yeah, that connection can mean so much.
Absolutely.
Chioma, thank you so much. This is a really important topic. Remember to set your clocks back this weekend. We appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again for having me, Courtney.
Our pleasure.